there's been a lot of talk this week about the Doherty Institute modelling, which is behind Australia's plan to open up. So what does that data actually say? It shows that if restrictions were relaxed at 70% vaccination levels, whether we start at 30 cases or 3,000 doesn't make much of a difference. We just reach the same peak faster. The key is how effectively we can test, trace, isolate and also quarantine. Under partial measures, the modelling predicts daily infections would peak between 35 to 55,000 in around 6 months, with a total of 385,000 cases and around 1,500 deaths. But with optimal measures in place, that drops to fewer than 300 daily cases, with a total of 3,000 infections and just 13 deaths. Joining me now is Professor Sharon Lewin. She's the director of the Doherty Institute, the experts who have drawn up this modelling for the path to reopening for National Cabinet. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nat.
So let's go through, because it's very confusing, all these facts and figures that are being thrown around. If we open up when we get to 70%, just give us, say, a weekly average of how many cases we can expect and how many deaths we can expect.
Okay, so I think the first principle is that getting to 70% doesn't mean that we suddenly drop everything else that we do. So vaccination is only going to be really beneficial in a country like Australia if we combine it with public health measures, as you say, test, trace, isolate and quarantine, and some other limited public health measures that restrict transmission. So the assumptions in the model is if you have a seeding event of 30 cases and you let it go, it will just get to hundreds of thousands of cases like you've shown. We don't want that to happen. So the model factors in if you had really good contact tracing, meaning that you can follow up every case and make sure they're in isolation, what we've got very used to and very expert at. And of course, that capability works much better when you've got fewer cases. If that's working really well, then over the subsequent 6 months or modelled over 180 days, you'd expect in the range of about 1,500 infections. So dramatically reduced numbers of infections than if you had no public health measures in place. And over that period of time, which is is 70% vaccination, what we call phase B, lockdowns are far less likely, but still could be possible in that phase. So we have to still use public health measures, and that may also include, mask wearing where you can't distance and some limits on big crowds.
So your modelling is... We've talked a lot about the modelling being based on the 30 cases, and we know that there are thousands in New South Wales. We've been told that the contact tracers are hugely under pressure. Won't they be under even more pressure when we relax all the lockdowns? How are they going to keep up?
Well, that's true. Lockdowns limit the pressure on contact tracing, but you have to keep in mind that once you get to high levels of vaccination, the job does get easier because you've got vaccination obviously reduces hospitalisation and deaths. That's why we do it, very effective at that. But it also reduces symptomatic infection and reduces transmission. And also the goals of contact tracing change once we move into living with COVID, not zero COVID. We don't need to track every single chain back tracing and forward tracing like we do currently. So the pressures and how we use contact tracing does change. I can't say that it will be able to be optimal with those sorts of numbers. We don't know that right now, but the pressures do change when you're opening up in an environment of 70% people being vaccinated.
Right, so you're saying basically we have to treat this like the flu. There will be cases, there will be deaths. What do you say to the states like WA and like Queensland that are largely living fine now? They don't want any cases.
Absolutely. 0 cases would be the best outcome, but I'm sure they want to have open borders and returning to some normality of how we live, movement around the country, cohesion across the country and international travel. I'm sure every state, I'm sure every Australian wants that. And to achieve that, we will move, the prediction is that we can safely move from phase A to phase B with high vaccination rates and good track, trace and isolate. We will still isolate people with COVID. We'll still make every effort to stop transmission, but we don't need to get to that, very difficult spot of 0 the whole time. We could keep it under control, or what we call the transmission potential less than 1, so that you're not getting an escalating pandemic, an escalating outbreak. And that should well be achieved in these states that are enjoying 0 COVID, but they could live with low levels of COVID as well.
OK, we'll have to one day, won't we? Professor, we thank you very much for your time.